Well, hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us on Overflow. It is a wonderful Monday morning here, and I'm super excited to be with you all. Yeah, all joining us. So thanks for being here. So today we've got Aaron with us, and we've also got Ryan as well, and myself. And we are just coming off of week 2 of our new series, Perspectives, Seeing God, Self, and Others. Our whole focus during this series has been to utilize the Enneagram tool and the Word of God and to better understand how God has uniquely made and wired each and every one of us. Who we are, how we function in this world, how we see things, how we treat one another, our strengths, our weaknesses, our contributions, what we look like healthy and unhealthy, how we function in relationships, and all sorts of things. We believe that discipleship is most effective when we are very aware of how God has uniquely made us and what it looks like for us to uniquely become more like Christ, based on our personality, based on our strength, based on our makeup, and all sorts of things. So, super excited. We are walking through each of the 9 Enneagram types 1 week at a time on our Sunday sermons. And then in our life groups for discussion, we're talking about different attributes of the different types. And so I'm really hopeful that we're going to be learning a ton during the series. And Aaron kicked off our sermons on the types yesterday by talking about type 1. And so I would love to have her share a little bit of a recap of what she shared yesterday. And if you're watching live with us, remember, we'd love to hear from you. So feel free to say hello in the chat box, type in any comments or questions, and we'll definitely take those as well. So Aaron, give us a little bit of a recap of what you talked about in the sermon yesterday.
Yeah, totally. So we went through Enneagram type 1, and type 1s can generally be described as perfectionistic, idealistic. I kind of added my own in there. I said I think type 1s walk around with really a hyper awareness of like what is good. A lot of type 1s can look at something and see very easily, very naturally how it can be improved upon. Type 1s are very good with systems and doing things the right way, and very concerned with like kind of that rightness. And then we walked through the parable of the lost son and actually kind of focused on his older brother, who exhibits a lot of character traits of an Enneagram type 1, who's always doing the right thing, but then maybe had a hard time with some anger when the younger brother came back and was received with grace. And to be honest, even as an Enneagram 1, it was hard to preach because I have a lot of empathy for the older brother who does the right thing and then has a hard time when the younger brother who did everything wrong comes back and is received with so much grace and the grace of God. And so we talked about how an Enneagram 1's core sin oftentimes is anger, which can lead to resentment or just bitterness, and something that we can hold on to, and then how an Enneagram 1's core fear is often criticism, and how Enneagram 1's in their pursuit of being good and right and doing everything well can often be overly critical of themselves and or others. And so we kind of walked through kind of holding both, kind of holding the passage and exploring that, and then also looking at Enneagram 1s. Did I miss anything big there? Oh, and we talked a little bit about how we can, for those of us who are not Enneagram 1s, how we can love and kind of meet Enneagram 1s a little more in the way that they see the world.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I love how you talked about the older brother and the parable of the lost son. And I love how much you related to the older brother and how the type 1 kind of connected. And I feel like I saw the older brother in a little bit more, with a little bit more compassion. I think I've always identified more with the lost son and feeling like, yeah, like who wouldn't be compassionate? This poor dude, jacked up his life, and what a great dad, and this is stubborn older brother, he's just cranky. And so I think I had a lot more compassion for like, yeah, he was really working hard and doing what was right. And it was in a very honorable place, but had such a hard time coming and expressing grace. I think there's a piece there in the sermon that you talked about how the older brother's righteous attitude and lifestyle prevented him from having grace on his younger brother. And I thought, oh, that just makes so much sense to me. And that's where one of the big misses is. So, yeah, I really appreciated all that you shared. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think I really, building on that, I really liked the piece of what you said about anger, Aaron. And I think this piece about anger that I'm about to say is something that relates to everyone, regardless of their Enneagram type, even though one of their core sin struggle is anger or resentment. But one thing you said is when we are angry, we really need to look at the fruits of our anger. Does anger lead us to being bitter, to treat people badly, to this like negative type of fruit? And if it is, then in our anger, it is leading us to sin. Whereas anger is not in itself a sin. There is righteous anger, and if your anger is leading you to advocate for justice, to try and fix something that's broken without attacking, being mean, tearing people down for no reason, then that's really righteous anger. And anger can be really good in that sense. So I think the challenge there is like, when for us individually, when we get angry, do we have a righteous anger, or in our anger, are we leading us to sin? And you mentioned the verse that said, in your anger, do not sin, how we're called to live. So I think anyone who's ever experienced anger can connect with that and really think about how their anger is, if it's manifested in a way that our anger is leading us to sin, or is our anger a righteous anger that God would, in a sense, be proud of, that we are being angry about the right things and fighting for justice and fighting for what's right without sinning, without tearing people down. So I thought that was a really powerful piece. And that applies to everyone outside of the Enneagram. Because I think when we talk about these things, we talk about the Enneagram 1 core sin of anger, and therefore how to deal with anger. How to deal with anger is something we can all relate to. So if we're actually listening and engaging with these things, it's not just a sermon for Enneagram 1s, or even just a sermon about how to be nice to Enneagram 1s. There's pieces of this that can relate to all of us. And I think when we approach this series, that mindset, and listen closely and think, where does this connect with me, and how can I grow better as a Christian in what I'm hearing? I think that was a big takeaway for me, because it made me, as an Enneagram 5, reflect on my anger and how I can do it better. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. And, I think for me, in my experience, what I've seen with other people, it's either we just learn not to get angry, to avoid anger. And that's, for me, that's a lot of my type, is just avoiding negative emotions. I don't want to be like that angry person, so I'm just never going to get angry. But then we just become super passive, and we just don't care about anything anymore. Or we get angry and we get frustrated and mean and cruel and agitated, and we do sin. I think learning how to get angry in a God honoring way is very important and very tough.
Yeah, very difficult.
Yeah, but is very needed, because
Yep.
anger can be a great motivation to. I see something. I was watching this morning a little bit of the closing arguments of the prosecution for the Derek Chauvin trial, and I just found myself getting so angry. I wanted to just be so angry, and so even for me, praying through, okay, how can I be angry at what's going on in a way that can bring redemption, hope, and healing to the world? Yeah, so that's just like a side piece, I guess, for sure.
And I'll just throw out, I think, this might not be true for every person, but I think that for most of us, including most of us Christians, I think most of our anger does lead to sin, if we're being honest. We're actually reflecting on how we act in our anger. Often, I think we are sinning, me included. And I think that's something that we need to call ourselves out on. And if that's true, be aware of that and try to grow and improve and learn ways to manage our anger better, so that we don't sin anyways. So.
I think for me too, as an Enneagram 1, when I first, and I was going to mention this later, but I actually was mistyped for a long time and didn't know I was an Enneagram 1. I thought I was another type. I think the anger for Enneagram ones, it doesn't always have to feel like you were just describing, Ryan, when you're watching the trial. Like you can feel that kind of like, wow, this really just makes me angry. And I think sometimes for Enneagram ones, it doesn't always feel like that. Like I mentioned in my sermon, like I don't think that I'm an inherently like angry person. I don't think that most people that know me, hopefully, like I don't think I walk around, yelling all the time. But I think that can also manifest itself in like holding grudges. So like if someone wrongs me, like I wronged a friend like back in like November, and like I knew for a long time that I needed to apologize to that friend, but it took me a long time to get like I could hold on to like my through a conflict, or like it took me way longer than it should have to apologize to that friend for what had happened, and so I think sometimes we say anger and we think, well, I don't yell, I don't, I think whatever it is. And I think sometimes that can manifest itself in more subtle ways that we might not, realize. Is that kind of anger, that bitterness, or, I think sometimes it might not be so obvious. Like we might not describe ourselves as angry people, but then when we look at our hearts and look at the way we react to things and our core, like what we go to when there's a conflict or when someone disagrees with us or when we feel like someone is wrong. So anyway, yeah, I wanted to mention that because for a long time I was like, oh, I don't relate to this. And then when I really looked at my heart and my life, I could see, oh no, I do. It didn't look like how I imagined anger looking like in my mind sometimes. I don't know if that's making any sense, but.
No, for sure. And I'll speak. So being married to an Enneagram 1, my wife, Sarah, I think one reason, this is a relatively recent way this manifested. We talked about this in the Enneagram series, even just starting it last week, already helped us have this conversation and process this in a new way. So the series has already been good for us. But Sarah talked about how, she asked me to, she wants me to help out around the house and carry the load and, which is all things that me as a good husband I should do. And sometimes I'm flaky and don't do things, like I blow things off that I should be doing, and, because I'm me. But, and she said that for her anger can often come out as resentment. And in that situation, and as a perfectionist, ones are generally titled as a perfectionist. She feels like she can't rest or she can't unwind until all the things that need to be done are done. And for me, I'm like, I need to unwind so I can do things. I'm like the other way around. Like, I can't do things right now. Like, I'm stressed, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so it's kind of opposite in that. But then when that happens, when I'm not doing those things, she's realized, and she brought this up last Sunday, she realized that she is angry at me twice. She is, number one, resenting me that I'm not doing the obvious, that I'm not doing the things I'm supposed to do. And she feels resentful towards that. But then two, she feels resentful that I'm having fun and she's not, and she can't because she can't unwind until the things are made right. Like, and she can't let go of that. I don't know if Erin, that sounds like something you'd feel as well.
I can 100% relate to that. The whole thing.
Yeah. So she's like angry and then is resenting me twice in one thing because, I'm not doing what she asked me to do and I'm being flaky and she can't rely on me. And then I'm having fun, messing off, goofing off or unwinding or whatever, and she's not. So anyways, and in those types of resentment, she told me that, and that was kind of eye-opening to me, just like, wow, like I never thought about how that could make you feel frustrated that I get to have fun and you don't. Well, that was kind of the part that was more eye-opening to me. Anyways, which really I think makes me feel like I need to do more and do better, which I always do, but that's a whole nother thing. Anyways, but so anyway, just the anger, even like, a marriage relationship and how that resentment can build up. But I think it was very good and very healthy of Sarah to realize that and process that with me. So the Enneagram series is already doing great things for us.
That's awesome. And that opens up the door, because then following through with your chores, for example, or responsibilities is not just about making sure that you are following through with what you said you would do or what you're assigned to do, but it also becomes an act of serving. I have a dynamic in my marriage where I like to recreate, if that's even the right way to say that, before I work, because that kind of builds up my energy, and then I have the energy to work. And partly wife, it's like she needs to get it all done because she can't rest until it's all done. And so for me to say, okay, I am going to not recreate first. I'm going to get the work done first because I know it's going to help you rest well, becomes an element of sacrifice, an element of service. And so,
Love, showing love.
yeah, that's a way that we can then love ones, or that we can then love others, is by saying, what do you need? How can I serve you? And how can I be there? Because it's easy for us in any relationship, significant other, a friendship, coworker, to be frustrated that someone else is not like us, to be frustrated that we can't just do things the way we want to do, but that we have to change for someone else. But so much of loving others, like the way that Jesus loves us, is meeting people where they're at and loving them with what they need. And maybe doing things a different way, not because it's the way we'd prefer or that we're best at, but because it's most helpful to someone else, can be an important way to do that. So,
Yeah. And I think it's funny because, oh my gosh, a great thought. I just lost it. Oh, I got it. So I think the best days that Sarah and I have together are like Saturday morning. We generally are getting all the things done that need to be done, like, laundry and, any cleaning in the apartment. I clean the bathrooms. That's super fun. It's not fun. Anyways, that's fine. But things like that, right? So we do these things, go grocery shopping. We get all the stuff out of the way Saturday morning or early afternoon. The best times we have together are the Saturday evenings or the Sundays, even, where all the things are done that need to be done. And me and Sarah both just get to sit down, relax together, spend time together, especially because during the week, 2 or 3 of the weekday evenings, like I'm at work and doing youth group or young adult or whatever, so it's really that time where you're just going to sit down, all the stressors are done. For Sarah, I don't need that personally, but Sarah needs that to really unwind and enjoy and be with me. And so we talk about, this is a great way to love Enneagram ones. Like, sure, I can serve Sarah by doing this and love her by doing this, but it also creates the best space for us to connect and the best space for us to love each other. She can love me better when these things are done. And then our relationship just gets better and we're both enjoying our time together and being together in relationship. So we say it's like a great way to love Enneagram ones, but if we meet their needs and love them, it really is a great way for the relationship to create more, love and have that time together and have that, that really high quality time together where all the needs are met. And then we can just be in a happy, relaxed, fun state together. If that makes sense. So, I think when we talk about how you love people of that type, and things like that, especially like in marriage, in particular, I think that really immediately becomes mutual because you're just able to meet each other's needs better when you're doing that.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. I just want to give a shout out too to Wayne. Wayne, thanks for joining us online. And he said he was finally able to make it out to service yesterday. And so I love that you could come and join us outdoors. That's awesome. And Monica, thanks for joining us too and just being here and being a part of this. And so much. And so I want to kind of jump into a little bit more on Enneagram type 1 before we go into talking about all the types and how we learn our types, and just talk a little bit more about how do we love and appreciate them, and then how can Enneagram type 1s be intentional with their spiritual growth. For me, I'm a type 7, so I'm an enthusiast. Celebration is my thing. In a lot of ways, type 1s throughout my life have been like my nemesis, and it's like they wanted to color in the lines. I wanted to color out of the lines. They wanted to follow the rules. I wanted to break the rules, bend the rules. What are rules? Do we even need rules? They enjoyed the structure and appreciated that. I thought, let's break the structure. Like, let's think differently. Like, let's do. And so looking back at my life, there was a lot of conflict I had with people that were probably Enneagram 1s, and our personalities just clashed. I think as I got older, and even Enneagram's been a part of this, I've learned to really appreciate the value and the contribution that Enneagram 1s bring. The focus on structure, the focus on doing things right and the correct way, their value for excellence and their value for doing things really well. And so I've learned, I think, for me to really appreciate the value added that 1s contribute, and also see the ways that I, as a 7, can be very frustrating and irritating and exhausting to our type 1s out there. And so if you're watching this and you're a type 1 and I've wronged you in our life, I'm very sorry. But for you guys, yeah, what are some things that we can do to appreciate and value the contribution that ones bring?
I want to say really quick in response to you said there. I think I've showed you guys this, but there's a song a church did it actually called Enneagram Rhapsody. It's a play on Bohemian Rhapsody, and one of the lines in it is about the sevens, and it's like it says, "You think you're having fun, but you're stressing out the ones." Anyways, so that just totally matched everything you're saying. I just thought it was really funny. Anyways, Aaron, do you want to actually answer Ryan's question?
That's so funny. Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like when I first started learning about the Enneagram, like I didn't realize that, I just didn't think about how like everybody just didn't see it that way. Do you know what I mean? So like for me, when it bothered me that someone didn't do something in the right system or the right way, I didn't realize until like Enneagram gave language for it that it's like, not everybody really cares about the system the way that I do, right? Not everybody cares about the procedure the way that I do. But for me, it's very natural to be like, well, what steps do I need to take? Boom, boom, boom. I need to do it that way, right? And that's just how my brain.
And that's how everyone should do it.
Well,
but that's your default though, because you just think, well, everyone does it like this, right? I think that,
Right. I find myself looking for the system. Like I remember the few times I preached, I was like, cool, so tell me the formula for doing this. And Ryan was like, that's not how it goes. Like there isn't like a plug and play. Like you don't just, like you don't just plug it in and we do things the same way every time. It's not like the straight system. But for me, the way I view the world is I automatically am looking for that structure. Right. And not everybody, and that's why I love even the title of the series, Perspectives, because like, it's like even like a passage of scripture, like we all are going to identify differently. Like, especially I think this story this week was a good example. Like you always related to the younger brother. I never related to that guy, right? I never saw myself in that space, in that story. And so it's just so interesting that we all just approach with such a different angle, but it can be so hard to realize that not everyone is approaching something with the same angle that you are. So anyway, that doesn't really answer your question, but we did talk a little bit about loving ones, and like Bogart, I would love your opinion too, because you are married to a one. So I know that I might even have a blind spot in this area because I don't realize other ways that like what it is to be in a relationship with a one, because I am a one. So, but yeah, we talked about, gosh, what did we say? We said like the systems and like trying to follow. But Ryan and Clement looked at my sermon beforehand and gave me some notes, and was like, he added something about we can't always do it perfectly in the system or something. And I was like, oh, you're right. I guess I need to say that, right? But like I didn't want to say that. I wanted to say do things the right way the first time, right? But that's not, that's not maybe not realistic. But yeah, and just really respecting their integrity and honesty and the high value that one's put on that. And then one really big one too is just when there is criticism for a one or constructive criticism or feedback or notes, just realizing that like a one is already going to approach criticism, already very aware of the criticisms they have for themselves. Like even yesterday I was telling someone, like for me, most people in my mind, when they have something they've worked on that's precious to them, I feel like they present it to people like this, like here's my work. For me, I feel like I present it a lot of times like this, like I'm giving it to you, but I'm ready for you to throw the tomatoes at me. Right. So here's my work, but I'm expecting you to just criticize it real hard because that's what I do to myself. And I look at something and I can see the gaps and I can see the weak points and right. And so I expect that of others. And so just in criticism or feedback, just coming alongside a one to walk in that a little bit. So I don't know if you all have anything else to add, but.
Oh, I would just say like I've experienced that in my almost 3 years of marriage. I've experienced that in a lot of ways. Like there are times where Sarah makes a mistake or she does something wrong, and then like there's one time in particular, I won't get into all the details, but like she did something wrong and it wasted a bunch of our time. And then I said, well, hey, next time let's do this. And she like looks at me and she's all like, I've already been saying that to myself in my head for like ever since it happened. Like you're telling me nothing new and I already hate myself for it. And like me just like, I didn't offer it in a harsh way at all. I just said like, hey, well, next time we can do it differently like this and make this improvement. And she's all like, I've already been saying in my head for a while, like I'm, and I think the thing that I learned is like Sarah is her own harshest critic. And I think that's kind of what you were saying too, Aaron, is that, she's very hard on herself. And therefore, when I offer something like that, it doesn't really help most of the time. I think it can be good if I actually have like a new thought to add, but the case that I'm thinking of, I think it was pretty obvious, but I was just processing it out loud. But maybe like trying to really say, hey, it's okay. People, I don't know if it's the best way to phrase it, but in my head, I could respond, hey, it's okay. People make mistakes and you do a great job almost, 99.9% of the time, because Sarah does do a great job 99.9% of the time, but we all mess up. But I don't know. Anyways, but just really not being critical and not being harsh with criticism, because in my experience, Sarah's already saying those things to herself in her head and she doesn't need that energy. So
yeah, and I think that kind of just sets us up for ones don't need us to come and criticize them. They're already doing that, but they need our support, our comfort, our care, and our encouragement. And I think that's an important piece. And I think what I'm hearing from you too, Aaron, is valuing their emphasis on the system and kind of walking through, just knowing that if we have ones in our lives, if we're going to intentionally break the system or the protocol or do things a different way, whether it's a better way or not is almost irrelevant. It's going to be a stressful thing for ones. And so even just being able to be, if you see there's a system in place and you've determined that you need to go a different direction, just having compassion, care, and understanding that that's going to be a more stressful experience. I think the 7 is going to be invigorated by breaking the structure and innovating something new. And the 1 is going to be more stressed by that. And just being able to understand that dynamic and to appreciate where people are at and to give them, the capacity to process those changes, and to walk with people and to care about people. I think the Enneagram helps us to really more effectively love others as God loves us, because we can understand where they're coming from. We can understand what they're experiencing and feeling and why certain things are difficult for some and easier for others and vice versa. And so I think we've just got a little more clarity on how to love others well, especially our fellow ones. And so I think that's been helpful. So I want to switch over. Marion, I want to say thanks for joining us. Thanks for saying hi. I agree with you. Sarah, Aaron did give a great sermon yesterday. So Marion, giving you props, Aaron.
Thank you.
So thanks for that. What I want to finish with today is a little bit of what our life groups are discussing, and that's how to identify our types. So we've encouraged people to take the test, the assessment. We've encouraged them to look at their result, or if they take the paid one, their top 3 results, and to read the type descriptions and then to really see what's what. The assessment is just one step in the process. Reading the descriptions, identifying with it, talking to the people that know you best and seeing what they think is definitely a very helpful thing. We are usually most blind to ourselves, but for some reason, God designed it where we can see others pretty clearly. And so we need the feedback and input from other people. So what have been some things, Aaron and Ryan, that have been helpful in the process of discerning what type you identify with, and kind of how to move forward with that? I know, Aaron, you said you were kind of mistyped initially, and then you landed. And I know, Ryan, you've kind of had like, I'm pretty sure I'm this, but maybe I'm this. And what do you do when there's other type descriptions that you identify with and things like that? So what has been identifying your type? What's that process been like for you guys?
Yeah. So for me, I actually, I think I did what most people do when I first started hearing about the Enneagram. I went online and took a test, which is a great place to start. And I tested as a 2. And for a long time, I tell people I was a 2, and I related to a lot of what a 2 says. But I noticed as I kept kind of going along that I was like, like a 2 talks about not caring for yourself, or maybe being a little people pleasing, sometimes in unhealth. And I can see that in myself to a degree, but I didn't always relate to like the core aspects of a 2. And I just thought, maybe it's not a perfect, thing. And then as I got kind of explored more and kind of realized as I was reading more about the 1, and I was like, maybe maybe I'm more of a 1. And so like, it kind of like the test was helpful and helping me start to evaluate and see myself, but walking through life and realizing, kind of really being honest. And the Gaultiers talked about that last week, where they talked about like, it's really an honest and vulnerable thing to look and be very honest with yourself about, what are my strengths, but also what are my like pitfalls almost. And I remember when I started exploring with some friends, like, I think I might be a 1, not a 2. And some people are like, well, you're not really like, very type A. I don't see you as like, organizing the sock drawer by color. And so sometimes it can be easy to maybe fall into like the stereotype of a type versus like actually looking at the core motivations of a person. And I think it's easy to say, well, 1s are perfectionists and your sock drawer is not, color coded. So it's not you. And that's not it, right? It's the core. It's really the core motivation, the core way that you view the world. And that's going to manifest itself in different ways for different people. And so really kind of looking at the depth of a type, and kind of that really, and just exploring your own life with honesty, I think is a big part of it, or was for me anyway.
Yeah, and I love how you say core, because I think as we read the type descriptions, we can probably all see ourselves functioning like every type at some point in our lives. And we're all going to have moments where we function like certain types, but what it gets down to is our core motivation, our core struggles, our core sins, our core strengths, the things like at the end of the day, when all is said and done, at the depths of us, like what still remains, I think is what really helps us to identify that primary type. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think what I will say is, I think if you're new to the Enneagram and you are just taking the test for the first time the last week or 2 or 3, I think if you just look at your test result and say, okay, I'm that, I think that it could be right and it could be really wrong. It might describe how you are somewhat, but I think the best way to really find out your type is to like, and this is why I think the question in our discussion guide says it, is to like look at your top 3 or so results. Maybe even like if you have the energy and you're interested, even look at 4 or 5, but look at your top few results and like read through them and say like, which one of this really speaks to the core of who I am. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'll say about that is I think it's important to think about that in terms of like when you're in your most natural and relaxed state. For example, I think if we're in the workplace environment, for example, working in a church, a lot of people identify as 2, because in a church, you're trying to serve and you're trying to be helpful, and 2 is a helper, right? So it makes sense that if you think about yourself in a workplace, you might think you're a 2, when in fact, you're just acting like a 2 because that's like the demands of the job upon you, but that's not who you are at your most like core. And when you're, like, you know what I mean? So I think there's, Pastor Juno tested as a 2, but he's a pastor. And I think that's a easier result for a pastor to get. And we think Juno's, well, we've decided Juno's actually an 8, but so anyway, so I just think about like, don't answer from like, oh, who I am at work when I have all these responsibilities on me. Think more about like, who am I who am I truly when I can really be myself and be like, more expressing who I am. And I think reading your top 3 or 4 or 5 descriptions and really like, I generally think at 1, maybe 2 of those will really resonate with you in a way the others don't. For me, 2 kind of really resonate with me, but at the end of the day, when I really dive into deep who I am, I definitely think I'm a 5. Yeah, it was just processing, and I've liked the Enneagram for years, and it's just going through the process of actually reading through it and seeing like, okay, yes, that I like reading through the Enneagram type description of a 5 on enneagraminstitute.com. It's just like, like point after point, paragraph after paragraph, like, yes, that identifies me. Yes, that identifies me. Yes, this resonates with me. And pretty much all of it does. Also, when I read the type description of a relationship between a 1 and a 5, which is Sarah and me, like the way it was really eye-opening. And it was like, oh my gosh, we totally like the areas where 1s and 5s work well together. That's where me and Sarah like work the best together, the happiest together. The areas where 1 and 5 conflict, like we literally fight about those exact things. So anyways, I just think the more you dive into Enneagram, the more you get out of it. And I think at the end of the day, you do have to come at it from a place of vulnerability. And Aaron, you talked about that at the beginning of your sermon, that this topic is inherently vulnerable because you're kind of speaking about, like, we already talked about your core, like Enneagram 1, core fear is criticism, and your core sin is anger or resentment, right? Those are vulnerable things, especially if criticism is something you take really, really hard. Then talking about that is very vulnerable. So I think this is a vulnerable thing, but I think when we are truly vulnerable, with a tool like the Enneagram, that can allow for a lot of personal and emotional growth. And I think Jesus calls us to be ready to grow and to learn more about ourselves so that we can love others better, which at the end of the day, that's what it's for. And to learn more about how God made us, and therefore how we can know ourselves better, be more secure in ourselves, and therefore love others and represent Christ better to the world.
For sure. I think too, it can also be very easy with the Enneagram to compare yourself to someone else, right? So it's like, well, I'm a 1, like maybe you listened yesterday and you're like, well, I think I'm a 1, but I wouldn't have really cared if the plastic cup fell on the street when I was driving away, right? Or whatever. And it's just like Enneagram, we talk about this a lot. It's like, it's not a monolith, right?
Yeah.
It's not a stereotype. And so, like Ryan Bogert, you and Aaron Aiken, our worship director, are both 5s. You're very different people. Right. But you're both 5s and you both relate to those core struggles and the core strengths of a 5. But it doesn't always look the same for each person. Each person is still going to be very individually different. And it's not a box.
Yeah.
So I think it can be easy when we start to do something like this to say, well, I'm not like that person, so I must not be a blank. And I don't think it's much more complicated than that. It's not. Yeah. And so I would just say that too. It can be really easy to be like, well, that person says they're the same number and we're totally different in a lot of ways. And that's okay. You could both still be the same number.
Well, it's funny because I asked Sarah if she'd be that bothered about a coffee cup falling off her car driving away from church, and she said, no, not really. I'll just go, oops. And then, but a story that I connected that is there's one time, how when you park in a parking garage, you get a ticket and then you have to pay for it. And it's like based on like, every 30 minutes is $1 or whatever. There was one time where we were parked for like a little over an hour or something, and we came back and she lost the ticket and she couldn't find the ticket, and she's like, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would happen to me all the time. I totally would lose a ticket. You know what I mean? Like, but she was like, oh my gosh, I've never lost a ticket before. This has never happened to me before. What happened? I swear I put it in my purse. And she's like, kind of like melting down because not like a full meltdown, but she's like really freaking out and like really upset at herself that she let this mistake happen. And then we had to pay the full like $20 for over 8 hours of parking or something because we didn't have a ticket. So it automatically makes you pay the maximum. And it costs us like an extra like $10 or $15 or something. It's like, whatever, for me, it's like, whatever, those things happen, mistakes happen. For her, it's just like, no, like, I don't make mistakes like this. This isn't who I am. Right. Like, that was literally her reaction, So even though like she didn't relate to the coffee cup story, but hearing you tell the coffee cup story made me think of another story where Sarah did something kind of similar, where she really just like, So I don't think it's like, yeah, like you said, it's not a monolith. Not everyone's going to react the exact same to every situation, but I see the core of like how your story connected to Sarah's story in the similar like way that interacts, if that makes sense. So
yeah, I've seen this interesting dynamic too, where if we're sitting in a group of people, and this has happened to me all the time. I think we've all got experiences like this where somebody does something and somebody says something and they're like, oh, that's totally like you, Ryan. And I think that's nothing like me. I am not like that. And then you realize that's how most everyone sees me, is that, it's similar to where like when I see my own reflection, right? Or I see myself on Zoom, I'm like, that's what I look like? Like, that's not what I feel like. Like, I feel like different. Like, it's weird to see myself. Or
for me, it's like, is that what my voice sounds like when I listen to myself talk? But that's all. Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
It's like my voice sounds a certain way. And then when I hear a recording of it, I'm like, that's what you hear? Man, that's annoying. Like, I would be annoyed, and but as we have these experiences where people reflect back to us how they perceive us or how they see us, we're most often, I think, in denial, because that might not be how we feel we are or how we mean to come across. And so it's interesting over the years, as I've received feedback from people, like, that's really how you perceive me? Like, that's how you see what I do? That's how you hear what I say? That's not at all how I tend to function. And I think the same is true for Enneagram. When we are discovering our type, there's going to be some pieces that we go, yes, that's totally me. I know. And other pieces we're like, that is not me. Like, I don't do that. And then most everyone else around us says, no, that is you. That's how we all see you. And no, that's not how I function. I'm not this way. And most everyone says, you are that way. And so there's going to be some pieces of this as we're discovering where we go, that's not me. But as we talk with other people who know us, they're going to say, well, that's how we all see you. And that's how you always come across to us, or that's what you seem to usually care about, or that's what you seem to usually go to in times like this. And so I think that's a big part of the self-discovery, is realizing that we might be different than how we feel or think we are, and being okay with that and accepting that, and then saying, where do I go from here? Okay, if this is how I am, what do I do with it? Okay, well, we have spent a good amount of time for today, and so I want to wrap it up. Any other final thoughts before we part for the day?
I think the Enneagram is great when you really get into and give it a try, although what you get out of it is going to be at least somewhat proportional to what you put into it. Because I think a lot of times if you're listening to us talk, it can sound like insider language, like, oh, I act like a 4, and in your head you're like, oh, I don't even know what a 4 is. You know what I mean? Like, so I just think the more that you put into it, the more you get out of it, and the more it starts really making sense, and it helps you to create a framework of how to see other people. I think like what Aaron, you were saying earlier about how you're like, oh, this is the right way to do something. Doesn't everyone see it like this? Because it's easy to feel like, oh, like, and this isn't just a one thing. This isn't any one thing. Oh, like my default is this. So that's how most people should be, or that's how everyone should be, because that's how I am. When in fact, that's not how it is. So doing this also really raises our level of empathy, our ability to see other people and value them for who they are and how they are different than us, and then how to become more emotionally intelligent in navigating those things. And like, this is something that I really emphasized in our last series, emotionally healthy relationships. When we become more emotionally intelligent and emotionally healthy, that is helping us to become more spiritually healthy, because we're able to to be more confident in ourselves and then love others better, which is a spiritually healthy thing to do, and how Jesus calls us to live. So I think I love the Enneagram. I think it's a great thing. I think this is going to be a great series. I just want to encourage people that, even if it's not coming super naturally to you at first, like the more you put into it, the more you will get out of it when processing it and thinking about it and talking about it with others.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd say, just to piggyback off that, I know how when you walk into something big like this, if you've never done the Enneagram before, it can feel kind of overwhelming. And it just, we thought of that when we designed the series too. It was just like, we know that it can feel overwhelming at first, but that's why, we're going to walk it through. We're going to look at each type. We're going to process in community, right? Because this isn't something that you do alone, right? The whole point is that we're growing to be more like Jesus, and we're growing to love one another better. And we're going to do that in community. And so if it feels overwhelming, it's just, we're going to walk through together. You're not alone on this. And, it's really designed to be that way, to be slower. So if you're not really sure today what your type is, you took a test, you're not sure, still discerning, I think that's okay. And we're going to walk through and we're going to explore it all together. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed today by it, it's just hang in there, because it's going to be great. And there's a lot to it. And we've designed it very thoughtfully in that way.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And the last thing I'll say is, as much as we're talking about Enneagram, ultimately we love God, we worship God, and His word is final authority, the only authority in our lives. We believe that the Enneagram is a very helpful tool for understanding who we are and how God has made us. But our purpose is not to leave this series going, yay, Enneagram. Oh yeah, Jesus. But our purpose is to really help us understand ourselves for discipleship, to know how to be loved by God, how to love God, how to love others, how to approach His word, understanding how He's uniquely made us, how to live out His word, how to live out the gospel, how to grow in faith, how to become more like Christ, given our unique personality. So our end goal with Enneagram is not just knowing about the tool or knowing about the types, but is really growing to be more like Christ and loving others well. And so we hope that this helps you with that goal. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great week and look forward to more time together. So